everybody. This is William del Pilar, and this is Points on the Board. Some of you know me as a conservative Latino politically, but a lot of you know me as a fantasy sports entrepreneur and pioneer of the industry. And we are going back to my old haunting grounds, and we are talking fantasy football because it is championship week. And with me, I have our guest, Juan Carlos Blanco. I just love that. You're Latino, Juan Carlos Blanco. It's like the women swoon when they hear your name, Juan. Juan used to work with me at KFFL. He's gone on to do some great things. What I'm proud of is the fact that I helped a lot of individuals with their start. And I'm not claiming to have helped Juan, but I'm proud of the fact that KFFL was there for writers and insiders and analysts and individuals like him. Juan Carlos, welcome to Points on the Board. We had you on earlier in the season. We have you back for championship week. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, and obviously, how are you doing?
Great. Hey, thank you so much, William. Great to be back with you at this time of the year in the football season, which is just an incredible time of year for a bunch of different reasons. But I've been doing really well. This is, of course, kind of the busiest time of year for anybody who's involved in sports media of any kind, with the crossover with the NFL, the NBA, NHL is going on, so many things. But I'm primarily working on a lot of sports betting material and some daily fantasy material for a bunch of different sites, going from thelines.com, which is heavy into sports betting, doing some work for nj.com, which is newjersey.com on sports betting there as well. The Game Day, which is another sports betting site, doing a couple of NFL articles there per week as far as betting articles, kind of giving a game prediction and a couple of good bets for people to consider. Over on actually, Rotoballer and RotoWire are two very, very prominent fantasy sites that I also do a lot of work for, both on the NBA and the NFL side. So I've really got my hands full usually at any time of year, but especially at this point of the year as we get to the end of the calendar and the stretch run of the NFL.
And Juan Carlos, what you just described is the way of today's fantasy sports warrior. I mean, a lot of companies don't like to hire full-time people because of the health benefits. That's something America's going to have to come to terms with. Prior to World War II, when they hired you now, but the workforce was so depleted back then, they had to entice people. And that's how health insurance came into being. And we've never gotten rid of it. So that tends to be detrimental to a lot of full-time hires. But you mentioned the Game Day. Is Tim Haney still at the Game Day? Is he at Game Day?
That's right. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, managing editor. He is usually knee deep in his work from what I can see. But yeah, a great guy who I originally met through RotoWire and who approached me once they were starting that site to be able to do some stuff for them.
Yeah, Tim Haney used to be one of our managing editors. He was one of my full-time in staff, moved from New York to the West Coast. My belief is remote working does work. It is acceptable, but it's not a career move. I wanted my managing editors in the office to help lead the company into the future. And he came out here, one of the nicest men I've ever met. There were some issues with him, with some within the company. And I'm proud of the fact that I defended him, because I have a belief, Juan Carlos, you never let anybody go if you haven't been giving 100, 150% to give them all the tools they needed. And once I slammed my fist down on the table and said, you will do that, not only with him, but with everybody else, he flourished into I want to say a star, so he may not be a Matthew Berry type star, but he's that grinder, that grunt. And to see him at Game Day now really makes, as silly as it sounds, when you get a little bit older, I'm in my 50s, I get a great happiness when I see people I've helped in the industry do well for themselves.
That's fascinating. I had no idea about that. I've seen some of his work history where he's mentioned it on Twitter and in his bio, but I think that goes a little further back, obviously, with KFFL. So there was nothing that I had specifically seen ever connecting him to the company. But that's really, really interesting. I'm always interested in the history of the fantasy sports business, since it's something that it's not too extensive. It's still really, relative to other industries, it's still pretty brief, you could say, even though it goes back further than a lot of people assume.
Exactly.
That's true. Very interesting. Yeah, Tim, I concur with everything you said about him. I mean, he's always been a delight to work with, and like you said, definitely a grinder, detail-oriented, always just seems to be working all the time. And I've learned a lot from him just grammatically as a writer, because he used to also when he was with RotoWire doing a lot of the editing. So he would, when he would send his feedback, I picked up a lot of things from him. And I know he also worked for the XFL. He caught a bad break.
That's right, bad break.
Briefly, he was kind of managing, I think, all their online content in this XFL 2.0.
Yeah.
And when COVID hit, so luckily he was, got back on his feet really well with the game day. I think everything is going really well there. So, yeah.
Well, I'm also going to toot my own horn. I created a writer's training program.
Right.
And they hated it because it meant that they had to talk to the writers one-on-one, give them feedback, et cetera, et cetera. But what people don't realize, not only did it help them get better work, meaning they had to edit that work that came in less, every single full-time hire I made at KFFL came from the writer's pool. And what made it even better is when I hired them, they moved out, they could hit the ground running. They were already well-versed. One more story of note you'll find fascinating is everybody knows the NFL Network today. The Rich Eisen's Total Access show is their flagship show. My partner and I were the first fantasy football analysts on that show. And you said you worked for RotoWire. We were in competition for RotoWire to be the analyst. RotoWire lived there. That was their town. They were a few minutes away from there. We had a freaking 3-hour drive, and they go, "Can you handle the drive?" And I say 3 hour, no traffic, an hour, 15 minutes. Morning traffic, random traffic, 3 hours. And we got the gig. We were good at KFFL. I'm proud of, like you said, the industry still new, but in the early days, KFFL, we provided content to a lot of people playing fantasy back then. If you got your content from Yahoo, from CBS, from Fox, your player news, we provided all of that. Then I sold as I wanted to, and USA Today destroyed it, and KFFL no longer exists. But I tell people, living your dream means sacrifices. So when I sold, I knew I no longer had control and I had to live with the consequences. So It's a catch-22. Financially, I did very well. My nest egg is set up. But legacy-wise, I have nothing left. But what I tell people when it comes to your legacy, you're dead, brother. Why do you care?
At that point, it's not going to matter. But I know you're building a lot of things right now with this show that you're doing and with other things. So I know that you still definitely have your hand in creating some new legacy, I guess, or a new chapter.
Yeah, you're right. I'll briefly say this. I am a Latino. I am conservative. I was born an American citizen living in Panama who saw two dictators. And that affected me. The impact of that has never left me. So I look at the United States of America differently than the average American. I look at it more from the immigrant's perspective. And so I've decided to battle that. The downside of that, all these people that I've known for 20, 30 years in this industry, those people won't return my cause because they don't want to get canceled. And I don't blame them in a way. So the path I've chosen is a lonely road. And to the audience, Juan Carlos is not part of any of that. Juan Carlos Blanco is just a damn good fantasy and sports betting analyst. And that's why I asked him on. And Juan Carlos, thank you for coming on. I truly mean that. And I truly believe that you are one of the best analysts out there. Now, we're about 10 minutes in, so let's get to it. It is championship week, Juan Carlos. Just off the top of your head, what is going through your head in terms of what fantasy owners, what do they need to make sure they're covering in a broad sense before we get into specifics?
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously injuries, I know we are planning on going into some of that because this is the worst time of year, without a doubt, needless to say, for some of these key players to go down. And yet, because of the nature of the physical nature of football and just the attrition on the body, the time of the postseason for fantasy and the championships for fantasy kind of coincide when a lot of players are starting to break down here at the end of the year as we get down to the last few weeks.
Exactly.
So that's going to be, obviously I think top of mind for every fantasy player who still has something at stake in their leagues. They have to obviously be ready or prepared. Have at this point in the week, even on Tuesday, with how competitive leagues are and everything, I guess they would have had to have kind of addressed and answered any injury issues that came up here within the last week or so from maybe their first round playoff game or what have you. And I know, of course, the one that's on everyone's mind, and rightfully so, is going to be Jalen Hurts. So I know we'll get into that further. But overall, I know there's a couple others out there. There's a lot of walking wounded out there at this time of year.
I mean, you have Lamar Jackson. You have Kyler Murray's out for the season. With that boy, is that not a debacle? You
Right.
know, that whole
Yeah.
that team is a mess. But for fantasy owners, has Kyler Murray even made an impact for them this year?
Right. It's been few and far between, I would have to assume. I mean, he still was able to provide some rushing production that, above average, kind of supplement what he was kind of coming up short with in passing. In fairness to him, and what I saw this entire season for them as is just one bad break after the other, where nothing would line up perfectly for
Right.
them. Beginning with Hopkins' suspension when it was announced in the summer, there goes the plan. Although I guess they got Marquise Brown kind of in response to that. They made the trade.
Right.
But even so, once Hopkins comes back, you're assuming, okay, well, we'll still get these two guys playing together for about 11 games. Of course, injuries got in the way of that. That didn't happen for a couple. It happened, I think, once. Then finally, when they are ready to both come in and really play healthy, now Murray gets hurt on the third
Yeah.
play of that game. So
Yeah.
it's kind of one of those years where it just hasn't been meant to be for them. Zach Ertz going out for the season for them too. Just a disaster all the way around in that regard. But I think Murray may have helped a little bit, but obviously not to the level of the draft capital that it cost.
Right. You know, one thing that people don't realize is the nuances of life. So I've been watching football since the 70s as a little kid. So what's that,
Right.
30, 40, 50 years of football. You know,
Right.
literally, I was a Panamanian kid. Nobody liked football but me. On Sundays, I had that on that TV and I loved it. Watching the Steelers, the Baltimore Colts. And
Baltimore.
the one
Yep.
thing, though, that people don't realize, back in the day from the coaching perspective, you would have to move up from, say, special teams, assistant schmuckatelli, and then you would have to learn, it was like the unwritten rule. You would have to work your way up and have been a coordinator before getting into head coaching. And the reason I think that's become a forgotten art is in the years it takes to do that, you are constantly reminded and working and understanding the young men you have. And I think a team like the Arizona Cardinals with their coach, there is no family, for lack of a better word. There's no understanding of one another. It's young punks and a young punk coach. And I don't say that in a derogatory, I say that in a immature way. Meaning you got a coach without the maturity, you got a quarterback without the maturity, and they both think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread because they really haven't paid their dues with winning. That's what I found really shocking about the Arizona Cardinals coaching staff is they don't have a winning track record from their college days. They were just considered offensive geniuses. And I look at the Kyler Murray situation, and I was one of these individuals who last year said, I don't know if he's worth the money. We don't know. Seeing him play this year, I'm like, no, that was the biggest mistake they made. But that said, if he can get himself not quite a Bill Belichick, but maybe a Ron Rivera type coach, a Kyle Shanahan type coach. Because Kyle Shanahan, people don't realize, he grew up with football, so he completely understands the game, the quarterback position. But I think Kyler Murray will become a flop, a bust in the NFL unless the Arizona Cardinals get a mature coach with history and pedigree of winning and understands how to manage and how to treat his players. I really wonder if that's happening in Arizona because of what you just said. Everything just seems to be falling apart. But more importantly, Juan Carlos, I don't think they have the maturity to handle it. And that's why it's kind of falling apart. What's your thoughts from my perspective? Wrong, right? And feel free to disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kingsbury comes across as a pretty likable guy, maybe too likable. I don't know. And actually, funny that we bring this team up because I happened to, for the first time, catch the other day on HBO on HBO Max the streaming version of the in-season Hard Knocks. They're doing the Cardinals this year. So you get the chance to see them a little bit more as far as their personalities are concerned. I've only watched one episode in fairness, but Kingsbury's always, when I've seen him speak, he comes across very laid back, very calm, just more of the new generation of coach. And again, I think he's not even 40, if I'm not mistaken. I remember when he was still playing. So I know it's not that long ago. So I don't really know how much respect he's either consciously or subconsciously commanding from some of these guys. I think they might see him as just one of them. Doesn't seem to be very fiery either. They've got a really good defensive coordinator who has some head coaching experience there in Vance Joseph.
That's right.
Might be an interesting candidate for them if they do fire Kingsbury this offseason. But, some of these guys getting a second chance sometimes at head coaching it makes all the difference in the world. I think it's happening right now with Steve Wilkes, a former Cardinals head coach in Carolina. He's really showing something, I think, with that team right now that he's gotten a chance with them. So we'll see. I mean, Murray, I think based on what you were saying, I kind of agree. I think one of the things he would maybe benefit the most, first of all, from having full health and having his two main receivers and his main tight end healthy for a full season, obviously would help him. The second thing is if they do get rid of Kingsbury and a new offense that's a little more vertical than this just constant horizontal throwing that these guys are doing. I mean,
that little kid's got an arm.
Murray. Yeah, it might really suit Murray better in the end, and he'll have a chance to make bigger plays down the field and so forth. And he's got a guy in Brown who's perfect for that, and Hopkins is perfect for short to mid range work. So they've got the making. I think they've got a lot of talent. In fairness to Kingsbury too, no matter what his demeanor is, I think if they would have just had full health this season, they would have been a lot better. But they may not have any more patience with him, regardless of the cards that have been stacked against them this year in this offseason. Owners, sometimes tend to have a quick trigger finger, and he might be gone, and it might be for Murray's benefit long term anyhow.
I saw either last week or the week before, but the Cardinals are like 1-13 the last 14 games or something like that, maybe 1-15, meaning they just haven't overcome the losing ways from all the way last season. I think the final point on Kyler Murray that concerns me is his size. What I try to tell people is there's a reason Michael Vick, Randall Cunningham, and some of these other quarterbacks don't have a ring. It's because they never learned to become a quarterback. A quarterback is a mental game. It's a game of science. It's about making your reads. And the physically gifted quarterbacks always rush too soon early in their career. And the names I mentioned never stop rushing. The ones that learn how to use their legs in conjunction with being a quarterback are the ones that end up with Super Bowl rings. And to me, the youngest player I have ever seen do that is Russell Wilson. He entered the league with legs and the ability to run. But the first thing I realized about Russell Wilson is he did not run and quit on the play. He would, Mark Schlereth made a stupid statement. Yeah, you do your first read, he's not open, do your magic. Russell Wilson may have become that type of player the last few years because he was on crappy teams with poor offensive lines. But early on, he would go through his reads, and then he would use his legs to get out of the pocket, move around, and then make the great throw. And that's my issue with the Kyler Murray, the Justin Fields. Then I look at Jalen Hurts, and I'm like, now there's a kid who's maturing. There's a kid who is becoming a stud. And to me, the Philadelphia Eagles, there's no doubt, that is the best team in the NFL. However, the downside to rushing quarterbacks and why I would never give Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed contract, much less Deshaun Watson, is because what happens with quarterbacks who tuck the ball and run, they always get hurt. It's not a matter of getting hurt where they miss a game, but if they're not 100% and they use their physical God-given gifts to make plays, they're already a few steps back. Speaking of hurt, let's talk about Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. Are we going to see Lamar Jackson this? Oh, hold on. Did they play already? No. We're on Tuesday. I'm thinking about Saturday games. Great Saturday games, though, by the way.
Incredible.
So what are we looking at with Jalen Hurts? He's done for the season. What's your take to fantasy owners and to people making bets? So do it twofold. The fantasy owner, what should they be looking at right now? And if you're making a bet, how do you look at the Eagles?
Right. Well, just to ask you a question. So what you're saying about him being out for the season, is that like something late breaking today?
Oh, no. Just what I read. I mean, I'm sorry. When I say season, I was referring to the fantasy season, the fantasy playoffs.
Right. Yeah, I guess some leagues are probably going into week 17 since now we have week 18 weeks. So I guess some leagues are playing the championship in not this Sunday, but the following on New Year's Day.
That's right.
Yeah,
I apologize.
So, but I think, I mean, so he's got the shoulder sprain, and it looks like, although they won't rule him out for this week yet, I think that's just probably a little bit of gamesmanship on Nick Sirianni's part because, they are playing a very high-quality opponent in the Cowboys. So, but I would say this, and this, I don't know how popular this take is or not, but Minshew, Gardner Minshew, his backup that will most likely be stepping in for at least this week, I don't really have a problem with him. I really think that this guy is going to succeed. If he has to start a couple games, you're going to see some pretty nice fantasy numbers from him. No one probably, no one's forgotten Minshew magic, in the early years in Jacksonville. That's only 2 years ago that he last played for the
Right,
Jaguars, I believe. And
right.
if you look at his number, just purely from a fantasy perspective, the guy actually puts up some very fantasy friendly numbers in a lot of games. I was just looking at that earlier today. The rushing, even the rushing aspect is there with him, although he's not going to give you obviously the same production as Hurts is, but that's a completely different level of production anyhow. But
Right.
Minshew can actually supplement his fantasy numbers nicely with some running. And he's got the experience. He was thrown into the fire, people forget, from day one of his rookie season unexpectedly. He's handled adversity. He's handled the pressure of being on a starting quarterback as a first-year player, and continued into his second year before he lost that job and so forth. But that franchise was kind of really in big trouble at that point. But so he can handle adversity. Now he steps into a situation that's kind of like a turnkey operation for a quarterback to step into. He's got enough experience to be able to maximize all these weapons he has around him. He probably gets Dallas Goedert back this week from injured reserve too. So he'll have a full arsenal to work with. I think that guys like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith and Miles Sanders can make almost any quarterback look good. And Minshew himself has experience looking good with lesser weapons than that. So, I mean, there might be a little bit of rust, but he played during the preseason and so forth. So I think he's got enough experience where he can kind of pick up on it. It's a tough assignment defensively for him against the Cowboys for sure, a team that can really bring pressure almost as good as the Eagles can. So there's going to have to probably be, a couple trials and tribulations. He's probably going to have to get the ball out quickly, but he's got the weapons to really be able to produce for fantasy owners. So whoever was able to kind of grab him off the waiver wire, I assume a lot of people were, all the Hurts owners were scrambling to do that. If they were successful in doing that and they don't have necessarily another alternative that's going to blow Minshew out of the water per se, I wouldn't be opposed to going into. I know it's a big game, it's risky, in your fantasy leagues, but I don't think Minshew is the worst option out there by any means.
No, he's not. And the thing about Minshew is he's a steal on the waiver wire if you play in 2 QB leagues.
Oh,
And say it's a 12-team league and you're playing 2 QBs, you're hitting that waiver wire to find that streamer. And I would sit there and say he's probably one of the better streamers. If he can get the offensive line protection, I think we could have a high-scoring game. I mean, who did the Cowboys lose to last week? High-scoring game?
And his old team, funny enough, and what I'm thinking about is exactly that. What the Jaguars were able to put on film for the Eagles against this Cowboys defense in that second half, they scored 33 points from halftime to overtime.
Wow.
Although the last score was a defensive touchdown, but regardless, they definitely put something on film there again in that secondary, going away, I guess, mostly from Trayvon Diggs, which is the smart thing to do, and getting to those secondary receivers. Philadelphia with both Devonta Smith and Quez Watkins, assuming that obviously that Diggs spends most of his time on A.J. Brown, they have the talent at those secondary spots to definitely maximize something like that. And Minshew can throw on the run. He can do all those things to escape pressure. So I don't think it's as daunting a matchup for him as it would be an immobile guy like a Matt Ryan or a Tom Brady at this point. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on Matt Ryan being involved in 4 of the biggest comebacks by opposing teams?
Yeah. I mean, in general, this is another guy we were talking about the Cardinals on an individual level. It's kind of like he's like the individual version of the Cardinals this year. He's just been snake bitten. It seems like even he's got a second chance at the starting job, which surprised me. But I guess Jeff Saturday wanted to see what he could get out of it, get himself the best chance to win some games.
Exactly.
But, the problem with Ryan, I think this year, which surprised me, he was always pretty good about ball security, but just so bad at ball security this year, both from the interception and the fumble standpoint. He's lucky. I think his lost fumble to fumbles ratio isn't too bad at all. He's been fortunate in that regard, or it'd look even worse. But he's just turned the ball over, so uncharacteristic for him. I guess just the offensive line, which is a pretty good run blocking offensive line, has not protected him well, and he can't move around too much anymore. So I was kind of surprised that they went with Ryan in that game against Minnesota instead of Nick Foles or even Ellinger, because at this point, what do the Colts have to lose? But
well, Saturday's playing for a job, and that's why I believe. I think Frank Reich was told by the owner, Irsay, let's see what we got in this Texas kid, Sam Erlinger. And then when Jeff Saturday took a job, he probably told Irsay, look, I love you, but I'm taking a job. but I'm going to determine who's starting that quarterback, not you. And I think that's why we got Matt Ryan, because I do believe Sam Ehlinger really didn't show much. I didn't see the games, but looking at the stat line and what I read, he really wasn't impressive, didn't show much, and Ryan was still the better option. I just think the Colts are just on a different level than the Cardinals, but kind of two teams in similar situations, and Frank Reich, I thought, deserved to get fired. I don't like it when management, owner, or coaching staff throws a player under the bus. And whatever you may think of Carson Wentz, the way they handled that situation, I thought was disgraceful in terms of how you treat another person. They let it out, the bad news, he wasn't this, he wasn't that. And I'm like, you're the QB guru. And all we've got him for 3 years now is in every excuse why you guys can't advance, why you can't take the next step. And in their defense, they were for a couple of years. I thought they were a quarterback away. Andrew Luck retired, and it just seems that they've just got to completely go back to the drawing board. Speaking of quarterbacks, so what about Lamar Jackson in Baltimore? And then from there, what about Brock Purdy in San Francisco? He was limited in practice, I believe. Are we going to see those two, or is Lamar Jackson, we're going to be another week without him?
Yeah, so everything I'd heard coming into this week is that Jackson was targeting this game on Saturday against the Falcons as his return date. That 2 weeks off would be enough. They say usually these PCL sprains are going to take about 3 weeks on the longer end of things. So if that holds true, and I'm sure he's going to try to do everything he can, even not that I think that this is a game that they absolutely have to have him in to be able to kind of beat a rookie quarterback-led, Falcons team in Baltimore. I just think that the Ravens pass rush is going to feast on Desmond Ridder and really cause some turnovers. So it could be another 13. I think they could get away with like a 13-3 win, kind of like what the Browns did to them last week. I think they could do to the Falcons if it became necessary. But I think Jackson probably wants to get in there. They're still fighting, I guess, for playoff positioning. Off the top of my head, I think they're 9-5. So they're still trying to get to the highest seed they can. They're not going to get all the way to the top, but they still have a shot at something decent. And so I think Jackson will try to get back in. It would be a pretty non-aggressive offensive game plan, I would think, though, for John Harbaugh to protect him, because I don't think they really need to be aggressive against Atlanta to really keep up with them or anything. They're not going to be too worried about the Falcons unless something really strange happens to open that game. They're not going to be too worried about the Falcons really putting pressure on them to keep their foot on the gas. So the only thing for fantasy owners is going to be you might be happy if you get the news Jackson is available. But I don't know how much he's really going to offer, because I think that they might just be content with sticking to the ground game as much as possible. JK Dobbins is looking good. They have Gus Edwards. They have a luxury of plenty of weapons there. And I don't know how much we'll see Jackson take off either with that knee, trying to protect that knee for the postseason.
Right. So, right. Let me ask you a personal question. Well, not a personal question. I have not been, I don't play fantasy football. I do follow football and all that, but I haven't played it in a couple of years. I'm old school. I love it when we're all in a room talking trash, drafting, have friends over. Now everything's done on the internet. So I'm like, I can play, and I'm a sailor. So when somebody talks trash on the internet, it's like, you talk trash to the wrong brother here. And I remember in the high stakes league, the commissioner stopped the draft. Dude, you need to chill out. And I'm like, they started it. I'm just ending it. But I guess to my original point, though, is Lamar Jackson, has he peaked? When I say peaked, I don't mean peaked like we've seen the best of him, but this year I didn't see the big leaps and improvements as I saw in the last few years. But that said, I don't watch the game as closely as you do. How has Jackson's development been in your eyes this year? Or is it just the injuries that just hampered too much?
Yeah, I think, what everyone looks for from him at this point is as improvement as a passer, since obviously that was the knock on him being more of the weakness that he had in his game compared to his running, obviously. So this year, it just kind of seems like a strange year for him all the way around, because another thing is he hasn't really run as often as years prior. So even that aspect of his game has been a little muted compared to previous years. And in the passing side of it, he seems to me to be about he's kind of maybe leveled off a little bit in his improvement. He's a lot better passer, I think, than when he came into the league.
Oh, yeah.
I think he still has room for improvement there, but also another guy there that would be helped, I think, by perhaps at least they need at least a number 2 and 3 receiver. I think they could
Yeah.
really upgrade the pass catching core for him a little bit. That would really help. I mean, he's got the tight end and Mark Andrews already, and I think Rashad Bateman is a fine number 1, a guy that can really develop into that. But of course, he had the injury this year. But if they still kind of need a good solid 2 and 3 for him there to really outfit him with some good weapons. They gave away Brown, to the Cardinals.
Yeah, that made no
But
sense to me.
yeah, it was a surprise move. Right before the draft, and I guess Arizona really was the aggressor there in wanting to get their hands on another guy with Hopkins suspended the first 6 games. I think they had high hopes for this season, so they figured we got to be prepared. But I think Baltimore, if they can draft a couple guys or get a couple guys into the building from free agency or that kind of thing, I think you'll see Jackson maybe have his best year as a passer next year if he can stay healthy and he's got some more weapons to work with.
Right. There's an old saying that's not true. A great quarterback will make receivers great. And I'm like, look at through the annals of time. Like my favorite team growing up was the Steelers. Terry Bradshaw had Lynn Swann and John Stallworth. Joe Montana had Jerry Rice and John Taylor.
Right.
Favre had Sterling Sharp early on. So I think a great quarterback can make an average receiver look much better, but I still think you have to have those pieces there. As far as Lamar Jackson, I think his showing this year, the injuries, his play in the last few years, I think that clearly shows why you don't give a guaranteed contract. Not only is there still room for improvement, but the concern is the injuries. And Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, all these rushing QB. Steve Young had a concussion problems throughout his career. Brett Favre had some stingers issues that time. So there's a price to pay when you are a gifted quarterback with the physical talent. So let's go to a stationary, immobile, slow white guy, Brock Purdy.
Yeah. One of the biggest surprises of the season, of the late part of the season, of any point this season, I think, and we never see he's in line to become the most famous Mr. Irrelevant ever, the last pick of the draft.
Oh, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's just incredible what he's been able to do, and again, it does go to show you too some of the talented. Having all this talent around you, how comfortable that can make a young quarterback feel. Kind of what I'm thinking about in a way, as I was saying earlier, with Minshew being able to step right into this offense that's already humming and like hitting on all cylinders and has all these great guys that he can just dump the ball off to and they can make plays. With Purdy, it's very similar, even without Deebo Samuel available to him right now, and even without Elijah Mitchell, who unfortunately the 49ers have just kind of gotten used to playing without him anyway because he's hurt so often. But with McCaffrey obviously has made all the difference in the world there because he's so much more than just a running back. He not only does he just threaten the defense and keep the defense really honest and on its heels, but he's such a great target to make you look good where you can dump the ball off to him and he'll get a bunch of yards after the catch. And at the end of the day, your quarterback stats look really good especially if you targeted him. This past game, the one they played Thursday night to open Week 15, was really good too in the sense that Kittle gets back involved, and he'd been kind of quiet, and now he's got that rapport going with him. And Brandon Ayuk caught a touchdown, so he's got a lot of weapons. I'm a little bit concerned with San Francisco's depth overall in terms of once you get past Ayuk, but I like them as one of the big. If you're making Super Bowl bets now for futures bets and trying to roll the dice on a couple of those, they're one of my favorites. The last time I checked, they were like at over plus 700, plus 750 for on some of these sports books to win the Super Bowl. But their defense being what it is, and the fact that Samuel and Mitchell are both supposed to be back for the playoffs, I think this is a team that if it gets hot, I think they can finally get this thing figured out, and Kyle Shanahan can get them over the top.
You mentioned Christian McCaffrey, and what I tell people is what makes Christian McCaffrey so great is their versatility, because what they don't realize is Christian McCaffrey's style of play of passing and rushing is the prototypical West Coast running back. Roger Craig, Ricky Watters, Garrison Hurst. People don't realize Frank Gore is one of my all-time favorite players. But people don't realize he was not the best fit in that San Francisco system compared to the Roger Craig, Ricky Watters, and the McCaffreys. And I'm not knocking Frank Gore. I just saw his name in the list I brought up, and I love the guy. 2 ACL tears. He came back. I mean, he's just all legend in my mind. There's no greater running back in terms of heart and come back from injury. And I love that guy to death. You know,
around these parts where I am, I'm in Miami. He's obviously he's a local legend based from his days, like you said, the two torn ACLs, and then playing with the Dolphins down here as well late in his career. He's a unique kind of guy. He really is, and by all accounts, a good locker room presence. And but to your bigger point, which is absolutely true. I mean, Roger Craig immediately thought about him when you said it. For us older fans, like, you know, we've seen Craig become, I think, the first. If I'm not mistaken, was it the first running back?
Oh, that's right.
Thousand. Yeah, right.
I don't know if it was the first, but I do remember that.
Yeah, I think it definitely was. And back in those days, we're talking about something that was unheard of, because Roger Craig was in a class of his own. Nobody had ever seen anything like that before. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he originally was started as a complimentary back to Wendell Tyler. I think in Wendell Tyler's
end of his career. Boy, you got a great memory. God, I hadn't heard that name in years.
Yeah.
In decades.
Decades. Much more known for his Rams days, but later in his career,
wasn't he a fumbler?
Yeah, I think he did have a fumble problem, and Craig eventually took over as a main back in that field. And McCaffrey, you're absolutely right, is the modern day Roger Craig, but Roger Craig really was the pioneer of that kind of style of play. And Garrison Hearst, had it not been for injuries, I think another great example. A lot of people who aren't up to speed on what Garrison Hearst was. He still salvaged his career pretty nicely, but the guy was going to be, I think, another a Hall of Famer potentially had he stayed healthy.
I agree.
McCaffrey's the perfect fit. You're absolutely right. What Shanahan likes to do, he's great.
The one thing I'm going to say about Kyle Shanahan versus say the Arizona's head coach or who was the old Eagles head coach, the old college guy, kind of chunky blonde hair.
Chip Kelly.
Chip Kelly. I mean, they all come in with all these books and all that, but the West Coast offense over decades has become so polished that I believe that's why a Brock Purdy can succeed. It's based. I've always looked at the West Coast, and I'll never forget a conversation that Steve Young had, and they were talking about his arm strength, and he goes, "Look, y'all be knocking me, but our deep pass is 20 yards. But my job is to hit Jerry Rice in stride, because they say he's slow, but when I hit him in stride, nobody can catch him." And my point is that the West Coast offense has always been a timing offense. And that puts more pressure on the quarterback for his accuracy. But when it's clicking, it's a devastating offense. It's an offense that can destroy you. And that's what I think Steve Young and Joe Montana had in common. And it takes time. And I don't know if the Kyler Murrays of the world, the Justin Fields of the world. And the reason I say Justin Fields is because the Bears have been a mess for the last few years. Then you look at Nick Sirianni, what he's done with Jalen Hurts. You look at the system that he's the Jacksonville Jaguars coach now. Oh, gosh. Super Bowl
Peterson. Doug Peterson.
Peterson. What he did to the point he could put Nick Foles in and they wouldn't miss a beat. That's what I'm talking about with the coaching. That's what I'm talking about with the nuances of the game. So Brock Purdy, any fantasy relevance with him?
Yeah, I was about to add to that. So the only thing with everything, all the good things we just talked about with the West Coast offense is Steve Young was a little bit of an exception back in those days sometimes from a fantasy perspective. He did put up some gaudy numbers with Rice and everything, and later with T.O. and so forth. But as far as Purdy is concerned, I think Shanahan being, again, one of the best coaches hands down, not only in today's league, but in a long time. And he's going to be careful with him. He's going to manage him carefully. He's not going to, I think, overload him with more of the playbook than he can handle. There's just no need to do that when your defense is as good as theirs. I think you don't really have to get crazy unless a special circumstance develops in a certain game. So that's the only drawback, I think, for fantasy owners right now is they're going to have to accept the fact if you have to roll with Purdy in your championship games. I mean, you're not expecting huge numbers. You know that McCaffrey and some of the other running backs there that they have even without Mitchell, like Mason and I believe, I think even Tevin Coleman is there every so often, called up from the practice squad. They have a few guys that they can turn to on the ground. And so a lot of the stuff is going to be short passing, as you said, high percentage passing, but that's not going to, that's not what we want, obviously, from a fantasy standpoint when you need big numbers. But that's kind of what you're going to get, especially when it's a rookie who's handling this offense and who that Shanahan doesn't see the need to really like overload, especially because he's trying to keep his confidence up because this is
Right.
the guy I guess they're going to ride with the rest of the way and all the way to
Well,
where they're hoping to get. Yeah.
and to delve away from fantasy, we're kind of talking fantasy in the NFL. The one thing about Purdy is he does know that offense. And what are the 49ers going to do if they go deep into the playoffs and say they even make it to the Super Bowl? And my belief in the West Coast offense is one based on accuracy.
Right.
You get a Steve Young in there, i.e., let's move 20 years ahead, a Trey Lance, somebody who has those physical gifts. But at the end of the day, if Purdy done so well, I mean, it's like it's a nightmare scenario. I mean, they'll accept it. They would love to have it, winning the Super Bowl with Purdy, and then going into camp, the battle, and maybe it's a Nick Foles, Carson Wentz type scenario. But at the end of the day, I look at this Trey Lance kid. I'm like, all the talent in the world, and we're going to be year 4 before we actually see him on a consistent basis. It's kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Real quick. Yeah. You mentioned Dobbins, I think, for the Ravens. He didn't practice today. He was sidelined in practice on Tuesday. It says Tuesday, December 20th. I'm looking at my date so I don't screw it up. When the Saturday games go and then the Monday games, I'm like, okay, where are we at? Yeah. But should fantasy owners be concerned at all?
I mean, if anything, if I haven't seen the report myself, if it's anything, I believe that what they're trying to do with him, I think they did this last week, is first day of the practice week is give him the rest, injury management, being very careful because, again, for those who may have not been up to speed completely on his situation, I mean, it came out this year that ACL tear that he suffered last year right before the season actually involved his MCL. It involved it was much more serious than what was let on initially. And then he comes back this year. He played, I think it was about 3 games. He has to go back on IR because of stiffness that I think he was having. And then he ended up having to get a cleanup done for some scar tissue. And he's looked tremendous in these first 2 games. Like he looks like back to himself again from the 2020 version. So I believe that they're going to just handle him very carefully. So I believe this is probably, without me just knowing anything else, I think this is probably just injury management, where it's a scheduled day off kind of thing. And he's going to be handled with kid gloves maybe until the final practice of the week just to make sure he keeps his conditioning up. But I don't think they're going to push him too hard at this point. They want to keep his legs fresh too, because the one blessing with missing time earlier in the season, as long as your legs are back to being healthy, your legs are a lot fresher and have more spring in them than a lot of these defenders at this point in the season that are trying to catch up to you if you get out in the open field. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Antonio Gibson was limited. Are there any serious running back injuries that that people should know about? Because I see a lot of names. It's like you said, it's management. At this point of the season, it's management. But are there any serious injuries that fantasy owners or bettors need to be aware of?
Well, I'm trying to think, I know Jeff Wilson in Miami, he missed last week with the hip injury, a game against Buffalo. We're going to see, I guess how he does this week. They're playing, it's a great matchup on Christmas Day down here in South Florida against the Packers, which have a questionable run defense. We even saw Cam Akers make some plays against them, and he's had trouble with his efficiency all season. Yeah, the Rams' offensive line has been so beat up. There's been no running room, and even he was breaking free yesterday on a couple runs. So it would be a great matchup. And so for Raheem Mostert owners, or those who maybe have kind of handcuffed the 2 of them and are kind of safe in that regard, Raheem Mostert guys would be, I'm sure, thrilled if Wilson didn't play and Mostert had the whole backfield to himself in that type of matchup, because he already, even against Buffalo, he really did a nice job and did a nice job, I'm sure, for some fantasy owners late in the season there, over 100 yards. So that's the one name offhand that's coming to my mind. I think across the league, as far as all the other big guys, I mean, Jonathan Taylor, I guess, is the other guy we need to talk about, because it looks like he's out for the season, pretty much is almost what they're saying unofficially, but no need to bring him back. High ankle sprain. I mean, what's the point at this point for Indy, except for, like you said, Jeff Saturday trying to make case for his job, but they have a couple nice alternatives behind him. So I think Taylor is obviously the other big one, now that I think about it.
What about Nick Chubb? He missed practice today. Should there be any concern with him? Yeah, he hasn't been on the injury report for a while.
Exactly. He's been pretty clear of the injury report. So I don't, not at this stage of the week, I wouldn't say any concern. Obviously, another thing to keep tabs on as the week goes on. with Cleveland, it's an interesting situation because I believe that even with the win over Baltimore this past week, they're kind of out of the playoff picture, or they on the outer fringes, really. So if there's any doubt about Chubb's status and any kind of long-term injury, they have more than a capable backup there in Kareem Hunt, and Dearness Johnson, I believe, is still there as well. So they wouldn't have to push him. But if he does play and he is reasonably healthy, he's another one that I know has a very interesting matchup that many people may not off the top of their head realize is a very favorable matchup against the Saints run defense, which has actually been pretty suspect all year, despite the fact they have some really good linebackers. So yeah.
Okay, so just to update you, I'm not sure if you were, but he was put on IR today, Jonathan Taylor.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay, Taylor. Yeah, sure. Oh yeah, that's where it looked like that was heading anyway. Yep.
Right. And going back to the quarterbacks real quick, I'm talking specifically in 2 QB leagues because in a regular league you wouldn't even consider the guy. Tannehill did not practice. Those ankles can be tricky. And what I mean by tricky is he may start a game too and a few plays be gone. But is Malik Willis somebody you would even consider in the streamer league?
Honestly, only if it really gets to desperation time. Because I have not liked what I've seen from him. It's concerning in the few things. Although we actually did see him play a full game, if I recall correctly. It just seems like between his troubles with accuracy and also clearly seeing like Vrabel is limiting what he allows him to do anyhow, it doesn't shape up as an appealing play on paper at all this week if it came down to it, unless you have absolutely no other option, because it's not just that, it's the fact that the Texans, first of all, even the last 2 games, they've made an impression on people by playing good opponents really tough. But even before that, their pass defense has actually been pretty good at limiting big plays all year, something that's easy to kind of overlook on a team that's had as bad as a record as they do. So, but they actually have been pretty good about limiting pass plays. And part of that too is that they've been so easy to run on that teams are just, they don't feel the need to really, attack too aggressively through the air against them. And with Derrick Henry, he's had some big games against them in the past. I think that even if Tannehill's in there, I think that this is going to be a run-heavy game plan. I'm pretty sure for Tennessee, as long as the game script allows them to run it. So yeah,
I'll be honest. I've been watching football since the '70s as a little kid, and there's been a few exceptions, but for the most part, these small college kids take a few years. My friend, he's in North Carolina. He's Black. We grew up together. So I'm Latino. We're always joking around. The last few years, we've had some serious conversations. And I reminded him, I said, look, he's a small kid, not small kid. He's a small school kid. He needs time to develop, because he thought, well, he's Black. He's from here. He's from there. And I reminded him, remember when we were growing up, and I mentioned Terry Bradshaw, Louisiana State, he was a success story. Carson Wentz, small college, North Dakota, a failure. Trey Lance, we don't know. The small college, it's Steve McNair at Acorn State. Was it Acorn State? Or
Alcorn, yeah.
Alcorn, yeah. And Steve McNair never lived up to his name of Air McNair. And I tell him, I go, the speed's different, the game's different. And we were talking about Malik, because I don't know if he's an HBCU, but my friend's from an HBCU. So he's always looking at those universities and the smaller universities. And I said, don't forget, he may take 2 to 3 years before he becomes NFL ready. And I have seen them play, I think last week, the week before with him. And that was my whole take. It's like, he just needs time to develop. So it's like, you throw him to the wolves, you have as much of a chance of destroying his career as just to see him on the field. So I kind of applaud what Mike Vrabel is doing. On the flip side, I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing up there in New England the last 2 years with Matt Jones? It's like, let the kid play. It's like you act as if he comes from an elementary school and was drafted, and you got to have the kid gloves. It just seems like a nightmare. From a non-fantasy perspective, what are your thoughts with that New England offense and the debacle? But before we go to that, do you think Malik Willis, part of his problem is he just small school and needs time to develop? Or do you think that it's okay to throw him to the wolves and see what he has?
Yeah, I think in the type of team that he's on, it's the Titans are one of these teams that expect to be and are in contention basically every year. It's not like it's a team that's going to just say, "Hey, we'll kind of sacrifice this season or roll the dice on this season and just let the rookie get through all the growing pains." They haven't been a team that's really in that position to do that, nor do they need to, because Tannehill is still actually he's proven to be much to the chagrin of a lot of people down here where I am, he's proven to be a much better quarterback in Tennessee than he ever was for the Dolphins, where people
Agreed.
here were teased by his potential, and then it never got to fully see him develop. I think that he's still such a viable player, and Tennessee has aspirations where it's not acceptable to just say, let's blow this season and let the rookie play, no matter how exciting he might be. So yeah, I think they just have to keep giving him time in preseason. I would next camp and in OTAs and everything, I would just give him all the time, all the reps that I realistically could, while still keeping Tannehill ready to play to start the season. But Tannehill at this point doesn't need a lot of reps, so I would
Right.
take advantage of that really, and just it'd be Willis all the time as much as possible in training camp next year. And I'm sure he's going to put in work during the offseason with some of these receivers like Treylon Burks. Him and Burks could develop into something special together, both being rookies. If they really put in that time, I think during the offseason, just hours and hours of working together, I think you'd see a big difference by next year. And if he can develop as a passer, much similar to Lamar, what we were saying at the beginning with Lamar Jackson, I think that if this guy can develop and get his passing ability caught up to his running, yeah, he could definitely be special. I think he's got a long way to go before we really know what the book is on him. Yeah.
But you're in Miami. Let me ask you a quick question. We keep digressing. That's what makes football fun. There's so many angles.
Yeah.
I was never a Brian Flores fan. And the reason I wasn't a Brian Flores fan was when I read the story of how, I can't remember what quarterback it was, but he benched his quarterback and didn't tell Chan Gailey, his offensive coordinator. I think it was Tua. He may have benched Tua and didn't tell Chan Gailey. And then the backup quarterback is the analyst now on Amazon Prime. Well,
oh no, well it was Fitzpatrick. It probably was the other way around. I think he might have benched Fitzpatrick for Tua. I think when they did bring Tua in.
Oh no! They Fitzpatrick was the backup,
yeah.
And Fitzpatrick was like, I didn't know he was benched, and Chan Gailey, we didn't know.
Yeah, that's right.
And it seemed like a disconnect, and it makes me realize that coaching does matter. I mean, could you imagine Tannehill? Let's fast track where he was in Miami if Mike Daniels had been hired then. I think some individuals are just great with quarterbacks. Kyle Shanahan, it's another one.
Oh yeah.
Because I look at Tua, and people, and the reason I didn't care for Flores, I'm like, look, Tua's not developing. He's not he has a weak arm. I go, show me a lefty with a rocket arm, meaning a lefty that all lefties look like they're throwing in slow motion. That's how they look, But I saw Miami play this year early from the preseason on. And Tyreek Hill, buddy, he has to stop and come back to the ball. And he can't get the ball to Tyreek Hill. Then I saw them play, and there was that one pass against the Bills this past week in the end zone. It was like just the perfect ball. And when I saw that play, I'm like, Mike McDaniel is going to be a hell of a coach. But more importantly, I think the Miami Dolphins can play with anyone right now. I don't think you can sit there and look at the Dolphins and put an L, whether they're going to be playing San Francisco, Kansas City. I think they can compete with anybody now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting down here because there's been a lot of excitement. It's been kind of a little bit of a roller coaster season because you've had these swings in either direction. And there was that time, like you're saying, a few games ago where it looked like there was a definite, chance for them to secure the AFC, anything from the AFC East all the way to the number one seed if they had continued on that same track. I think the high point kind of was right after acquiring Wilson at the trade deadline, where it looked like they really were rounding out this offense. At this point, I mean, it's just a little bit worrisome, their performance, especially Tua's performance like 2 games ago against the Chargers, which is really just strange. Especially with the Chargers not having Derwin James in that game. It just seemed like it was a perfect setup for him to at least have a really solid game and kind of have a toe-to-toe. I had compared it on another show I did that week to, it was going to remind older fans, I thought, of Fouts and Marino. When these two were going to clash, I thought it was going to be a high-scoring game, and it turns out it was kind of a dud. But now, I mean, I've got my doubts on them. I mean, it'll be interesting. I think they'll beat the Packers on Christmas Day. Even though I'm looking at Rodgers yesterday, finally having a healthy receiving core with him, you saw the difference, a healthy offense around them. I had said all along I thought Green Bay would play its best football near the end of the season because they have so many young players that
Right.
were going to need time to develop, and then they had missed time with injury on top of that. So, anyhow, so with Miami, I mean, they're going to. I think they'll still be in there as a wild card team. They're going to be dangerous, for sure. Obviously, with as long as Hill and Waddle are healthy.
Right. That Waddle kid. Woo!
Yeah. The big concern I think is depth there also beyond those top two guys, because although Trent Sherfield looks good when he makes a play every so often, like on that first play against San Francisco, if he has to be pushed into a bigger role, how well equipped is he? He's completely unknown quantity when it comes to being in a big prime role like that. He's played a complementary role his whole career. Cedric Wilson, they made it look like a great free agent signing as a number 3 guy, and for whatever reason he kind of has fallen down the depth chart.
Yeah.
And the other thing that has perplexed me, as much as I like some of the stuff McDaniel has done, is Mike Gesicki's disappearing act from the offense. The lack of the use of the tight end has been a little bit odd to me, because we've seen him have some really big games under the previous regime, both under Chan Gailey and under the next year's coordinator. I forget his name offhand. So I don't know why it is that Gesicki and pretty much all the tight ends have kind of been not really used, especially when they don't really have some great 3 or 4 receiver, third or fourth receiver here on this team that's stealing targets. That's the only thing I think McDaniel would do well to diversify, but of course that's just a layman's opinion. But yeah.
Well, I think sometimes it's the player, the rapport.
Yeah.
But and the schemes he runs, and as silly as it sounds, Tua's left-handed, so certain schemes, certain plays, certain ways they line up. Who knows what? But you would figure somebody like Mike Daniels, who has a little bit of history understanding the West Coast offense and things of that nature, would be a greater use. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. We probably just eclipsed the hour part, but I was talking to a friend last week because I watch football now heavily again. And he goes, so what do you think about last week? We're talking about Saturday games. We're talking about Monday, last night during the Packer game. And I go, well, my biggest shock last week, I just want to get your take on this, was Justin Tucker missing 2 field goals. Oh, yeah. And he looks at me, a kicker? I'm like, yeah, Justin Tucker doesn't miss. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, from a fantasy perspective too, I would think that was such a gut punch. I think to some, if you're in leagues, the one main league that I still play in, we still do minus points for missed field goals.
Oh, wow.
And depending on the distance that they're from, it's the shorter the distance, the more minus points you get if it's supposed to be an easier kick. So for people who are playing in formats like that, or you're so used to Tucker being such a reliable option that had to have been just a really frustrating thing, given the timing of it in terms of the fantasy postseason and so forth. But yeah, that was, you're right. That's very odd. I mean, he's the cockiest kicker in the league, but for good reason, because he's earned it. So he's always pointing and just a lot. Where you say kickers having pretty bland personalities, but he's definitely not like that. But yeah, I mean, even the best ones have their off days. So there was a lot of surprise. There's been a lot of surprises, I think, all season. It's been just an incredible season from the drama perspective. All these great, crazy ending to games. Of course, the Raiders and Patriots, this past week stole the show with that. But
oh my God, I've never seen a play.
Yeah.
Juan Carlos, I don't know how old you are, but as a kid,
I'm right behind you. Yeah,
as a kid, I saw the roly-poly play in real life. I mean, on TV. I was a kid in that era, and I've never seen a play like.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking at the clock, and I'm like. So overtime. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it was so funny.
I remember. There's a couple. First of all, you'll identify with this. The old Alcoa fantastic finishes at the 2-minute warning that they would play. The 4 o'clock games were great, but you would see a lot of stuff. So I think it was through there, because I'm 51, so I'm a little bit behind you. I started watching about probably the same age you did, but I started watching around 1979. So I don't think I saw the infamous Joe Piscaric Herm Edwards, A Miracle in the Meadowlands. That
Oh,
was
I saw that one.
something.
The handoff.
Yeah, the handoff. That's about, in a sense, from a game situation, game scenario, I would say that that's pretty similar to what happened here with the Raiders in the sense that it's an automatic play. You're not expecting anything to really come out of it, and you see something like that happen. It's somewhat similar to the defensive touchdown that you weren't expecting. But other than that, I mean, I think I remember this is a lot.
Well, Juan Carlos, for the audience,
Yeah.
what Juan Carlos is referring to, back in that era, they just ran the ball. Instead of taking a knee, they would just hand it to the running back, and the running back would run into the pile. And that's the play you're talking about. When the fumble happened, and that's kind of what if I remember, I don't remember correctly, but what I would assume created the knee, taking the knee for the quarterback after that.
Yeah. I was gonna say something that was a lot closer than that. In 2004, I believe it was the Saints and the Cardinals. I don't know if you remember this play. It's a 4:00 game, I think, here on the East Coast. And in the last play of the game, the Saints pull off the old Stanford band thing. They actually score, and then John Carney misses the extra point, and they lose anyway, which is just that was incredible. That was another strange ending. The miracle in Miami about 3 years ago with Kenyon Drake scoring on the Patriots. So that was one of the things they were focused on this week, was saying Bill Belichick, for all his success, have been stung with like two of the biggest heartbreaking ways of losing ever. You know,
I got to be honest, Juan Carlos. The way it was funny, Jones on Jones with the Raiders and Patriots. The 12-year-old kid came out of me as Chandler Jones is running. He shoves Mac Jones. I'm hollering, get up!
Yeah.
And touchdowns. I mean, it was just one of those weird, magical plays, and you're just screaming at the TV. My wife's like, doesn't know who I'm screaming for. I'm just like, what? You know, just screaming like, what are you doing? But we had the 50-year anniversary of the one play that, unless you were at the actual football game, no one knows what really happened, and that is the catch. You know, and the reason nobody knows is the camera did not get if that ball was touching the ground that Franco Harris picked up. And people don't realize it bounced off the head of the running back, then off of Jack. It bounced off the hands and hit Jack Tatum in the head or something like that. It was just one of the wildest plays in NFL history. And nobody knows if the ball actually touched the ground except Franco.
A couple things. Yeah, you said the catch. I know you meant the Immaculate Reception.
Yes. The Immaculate Reception. The catch was Dwight Clark.
Yeah, Dwight Clark. I think that a couple years ago, NFL Network put something on about a different angle that was discovered, or somebody found a different footage from the network or something that was uncovered that I think did show a different angle. But I think even then, if I remember correctly, there was still no conclusive angle that showed. It was one of those that I guess if it would have had if it would have been instant replay at the time, it probably would have been deemed too inconclusive to overturn, and it probably would have stood anyhow. But it's crazy because the Raiders and Steelers are playing, I guess, on Christmas Eve, on the 24th on Saturday night, so it's a day after the 50th anniversary that they're playing.
And something I'm not going to watch a special. I mean, I did not see that play. I started watching football maybe that was like 74, maybe 74. The first game I really watched, I'd watch pieces, but the first game I watched from beginning to end was Super Bowl 10. And that's how I became a Steelers fan. But at the end of the day, I remember John Madden telling the story that he was defending the refs. He goes, one of the refs told him that the refs were talking amongst. Did you see it? That's it. I'm not going to reverse the call. I want to get out of this stadium alive. Right. John Madden, I remember when he being in, he's like, I didn't blame the guy. I mean, it was a madhouse. I mean, what's he going to do? Put his life on the line, reverse the call? No. But one of the great football is still the most exciting sport to me because of things like that.
Right.
Now, the Final Fantasy question. Jalen Hurts may or may not play. I don't think he'll play. Jonathan Taylor's out. A lot of people are struggling for championship week. So I would always look at matchups in other positions. One of the matchups I would look at would be defensive teams. What defensive teams are looking at a potentially great game where a fantasy owner can go in, snag that defense on the waiver wire or through free agency, and hopefully maybe get a TD? Do you see any matchups that could result in some bonus points?
Yeah, no, great question. And I've actually looked at that this week already a little bit, just from the DFS perspective. I was looking at building some sample lineups and so forth. So I've been looking, when you're picking defense, whether it's season long or daily, you're looking for, like you're saying, or streaming in season long is very similar to daily in a sense that you're trying to find that 1 week lightning in a bottle. And this week, I mean, one of my favorites is the Ravens defense. The only problem is, obviously, I don't think it's going to be on a lot of waiver wires, but playing Desmond Ridder, like I was saying earlier, in Baltimore, cold weather, this poor guy, I mean, he looked a little bit out of sorts in that first game against the Saints, which are this year a good pass defense, but not of the same caliber they've been in recent years. And he was in a nice dome environment for that game. Now he's going out there to Baltimore, where it's going to be hostile, and these guys can rush the passer. They can get after the passer. The Ravens have had a little bit of trouble in pass defense this year, more than other years, but I don't think it's going to matter with Ridder and with the passing game weapons he has. I'm not really sure they're going to pose much of a threat. This is the kind of game where I could see them sacking him and getting him to fumble a few times, and a pick six or a return for touchdown is very possible. Also, for the leagues that usually award special teams like return touchdowns to defenses, they've got a good, return man in Devin Duvernay, who's already scored this year and so forth. So I think that they're excellent. The other one that I like is the Patriots, because they, even regardless of, even against the Raiders, they actually did get some good defensive fantasy points with some. They're always sacking the quarterback. They're one of the best teams in the league at applying pressure. So they have really good ball hawking corners, like most years. And so they're another team playing against the Bengals. The thing that interests me here, a lot of people might initially be scared off, except for the fact they're at home. They're desperate. New England is. They're at home, where their numbers across the board are a lot better on defense.
Right.
And Cincinnati has trouble protecting Burrow. New England is right up there with Philly and Dallas as some of the best pass rushing teams in the league. This is another spot where I can see at the very minimum some sacks piling up. And with sacks, there's always the possibility of a fumble recovery or a strip sack for a touchdown. You never know. The only problem, like you're saying, with season long is like, well, what's available out there on the wire? That's where the tricky part comes in. And then, it's hard. Obviously, we can't give blanket advice since we don't know what's on every league's availability. But, some other borderline defenses, I mean, like Pittsburgh, for example, which some people might be off of this year just because of some of the team's general struggles. But they can still get after the quarterback. And they're playing against the Raiders Christmas Eve, which they're at home. They are in Pittsburgh. And on top of that, I mean, Derek Carr has shown the ability to turn the ball over every so often. So that's another one that's interesting if Pittsburgh brings the pressure and Vegas having to travel across the country on a holiday. You never really know, what mindset, how focused, how sharp they might be. So that's one of the teams that I'm thinking about with maybe a defense that could be out there that might be available.
And what do they all have in common? All those defenses are still in the playoff hunt. And then I look at the Ravens selection, and I buy in 100% because good and well the defensive coordinator and those players saying, if we're going to get into the playoffs, we're going to have to do it because our offense has not been playing well.
Yeah, well, that's another thing, and I'm sure they're licking their chops at seeing a rookie quarterback there.
Exactly.
So it's yeah. I mean, I think they're a really good choice. I mean, the tricky part with defense is there's usually a few left over on every week,
right,
every waiver wire, depending on the size of your league. But and sometimes you can find some value there. You really can if you play the matchups correctly. I would just say, as a general piece of advice that could apply, is try to find the best situation where there might be some cold weather involved, which always helps. Even the Bears
bad weather
this year, I was going to say, even this week. Apparently just a blizzard of biblical proportions is headed to Chicago. I mean, even with Buffalo coming in, if the weather is bad enough, they could play at a level a lot lower than what people might think. In Chicago, when you get to heavy snow, you can get into fumbles, you get into situations where the ball gets slippery, and the turnovers add up and the fantasy points add up. So there's another kind of borderline defense that could be available in some leagues for sure.
Okay, before I let you go, Juan Carlos. Your strength is more betting than fantasy based on what you've said in terms of how people look at your analysis. You're great at both of them. But since betting is your bread and butter, I always tell people the closest thing to fantasy with betting is prop betting, when you're betting on who's going to do this first, who's going to do that. What would be your advice for a prop bet? I got that correct, right? Prop bets are who's going to score the first TD of the game, right? Things like that, right?
Yeah, or even individual stats.
Right, exactly.
That kind of thing.
What is Juan Carlos's, I don't know what you guys call it, like the pick of the week, the prop bet pick of the week. What would you tell somebody?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I hope I didn't put you on the spot.
Oh yeah, wait. I mean, it'll take me a second to think, but I'm thinking with the Eagles, I think there's going to be some hidden value there, just without even looking at what some of the pricing, and a lot of it might not be out yet actually, but what some of the prop prices might be on some of these Eagles players now that Hurts looks like he's not going to play. If and when that's confirmed, I think you're going to find some good value for guys like AJ Brown, let's say, his reception or receiving yardage prop, or Devonta Smith, that kind of thing, because the assumption from the sports books, and I think from the betting public, is going to be that you're going to see a big downgrade in the offense. And while we agreed earlier, yeah, there's definitely, I mean, Minshew is not Jalen Hurts, but
right.
He's got a lot more capable of keeping this thing going, especially with as airtight a machine as he has around him than people might realize. So I wouldn't be opposed, depending on what those odds come out to be like for those Eagles players. There's a spot where you could find some sneaky value and kind of take a chance on some of these players still producing at a decent rate. Of course, it all is going to come down to what numbers, what receiving yardage they're assigning to Brown or to Smith and that kind of thing. Especially also with the Cowboys secondary having some trouble last week against receivers that I consider to be more or less lesser caliber than these guys, like Zay Jones and so forth. So yeah, I think that's one offhand. Another player that I like a lot this week would be a Dalvin Cook against the Giants' run defense, which is
really okay,
slowing down. Slowing down players. I mean, even Brian Robinson had a very efficient game against them on Sunday night in the loss. I think that's another attackable spot. And here's one out of left field, in terms of big name players, but it's a guy who's really been hot lately. Whatever Jerick McKinnon's receiving yardage or reception prop is against the Seahawks would interest me most likely, depending on the number and the price, because Seattle has just given up a ton of receptions to running backs. And this is a terrible matchup for them. I mean, McKinnon, he looks back. I mean, we were speaking about Frank Gore earlier. Here's another guy who missed 2 years, I think, with 2 torn ACLs himself.
Right.
And he's just battled back. And he looks, this year to me, looks as fast as he did in his early years in Minnesota when he was really electric. And you could see it every time he touched the ball. And now
that's right. I forgot about that. How electric he was early on.
Oh, yeah. He had come, I think, from a small school also. There had been something, I think, if I remember correctly, some disciplinary issue that had kind of pushed him down in the draft a little bit. Minnesota took a chance on him, and he was really good. I don't remember offhand who the other back was with him at the time. I don't remember Matt Asiata being there and a couple other guys, but he never had a chance to be the number one guy. And he's not now. He's the perfect complement to his rookie, Isaiah Pacheco. And we've seen what Mahomes has done with him in the passing game the last 2 games. I mean, it's just been incredible what McKinnon has done. He's always been a great receiver.
Well, that was the whole thing with him. He was a dual threat, but he's like 5'9", 200 pounds. So for a running back, that's not an in between every handoff type running back. He's more of that West Coast style. And I think in San Fran had their struggles until Kyle Shanahan got there. But even then, McKinnon being hurt, and Minnesota wasn't the true sense with Zimmer. See, I was never a Zimmer fan because I think the Kirk Cousins we're seeing now is the real Kirk Cousins, where I think Zimmer didn't care for the offense, didn't care for Cousins, and it wasn't that he was trying to hurt him. He just didn't care about the offense, now that they have an offensive minded, I think McKinnon would have been a bomb there now, but I think in Kansas City, they can maximize. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, even if he has a limited skill set because of his size, he has a speed. He has hand, so they can maximize a McKinnon there. Real quick, because we may not get you back because you're going to be in demand. I'd like to get you back for the playoffs, but right now, if you had to pick, say the 4 teams in the championship games and the 2 teams to go to Super Bowl, who do you think has the edge to make it to the AFC and NFC championship games?
Yeah, I mean, in the NFC, I really like the 49ers and Eagles as a potential matchup. And the reason I'm saying, we've already gone through the strong points of the 49ers, which obviously there's plenty of them, the defense being the biggest one. And I think that they up to that stage, up to that game, I think that Brock Purdy can definitely, get them there, especially if Samuel and Mitchell really are back and healthy and so forth.
Right.
Yeah, and then Philadelphia goes without saying, assuming that Hurts is fine by then and so forth, and this thing is past him with the shoulder, which I think it will be. I think their body of work speaks for itself already this season. And on the other side, I mean, I think it's.
Well, hold on. Out of those two, I'll give you my take real quick. Is I don't think as good as their defense is, I don't know how it would match up to Jalen Hurts' wonderful scrambling. And what I love about Jalen Hurts, he'll be scrambling and then he'll just pop that throw. And to make it even uglier to the opponent, it's an accurate throw. So I don't know if they can handle it. Who do you see winning? Do you think they could handle him?
No, I agree with you. I was going to say when we got to that point that I do see Philadelphia coming out of that matchup because, number one, we're assuming they're going to be at home for that game, which is a big advantage when you've got a warmer weather West Coast team coming in. And number two, I just think that's where probably the stage gets a little too big for Purdy. It's too much to ask, I think.
Good point.
Him. And and that's where you're in Philly, the legendary crowds of Philly in a championship game. Oh, I mean, I just think that's going to be a little too much. It would be a late window game, I'm sure. And that would be, I think, asking a little bit too much of the rookie, even with all the weapons. And Philly's defense will probably take umbrage to, leading up to that game that everybody will be talking about the Niners defense and not enough about theirs. And they'll come out fired up. And I think that you're exactly right. I think another fantasy daily fantasy analyst that I really respect very much, he made a great point about how San Francisco, when they've dealt with teams, with mainly the Chiefs, that have come out and attacked them aggressively, they haven't handled it as well as some of these other teams that they kind of have built up their numbers on. Their pass rush is good against anybody, I think, but yeah, when you have Hurts and Brown and Smith and all these things coming at you at the same time, I think that it's going to be enough to throw them off a little bit, and then offensively, I think they won't be able to keep up.
Right. Juan Carlos, you brought up a good point. Like, people talk about the Buffalo's defense. I'm not sold on them. You look at the scores of the games, the good offenses always pile on the Bills. But the Niners have been a bit more steady. I'm just like you. I just don't think the defense, because of the rules, the way the game is played today versus 20 years ago, defenses are already, behind the 8 ball. So for the 49ers to be doing what they're doing, I think is great. But what I tell people is once the playoffs start, all these little trick plays, all this, all that goes out the window because you're going to have to smash it up and get down and dirty in the trenches to win it there. And that winning the trenches is what opens everything up. But you're talking the elites of the elites. Okay, so for the AFC, who do you see?
Yeah, so then in that regard, I mean, I'm looking really at Buffalo and Kansas City is what I'm thinking about. But there, I think it's a little less clear-cut because we have this other team hanging out there, which is the Bengals. I really think, as the defending AFC champs, we've got to give them respect because we know that the stage isn't going to be too big for them. We already saw what they did. I mean, the route they took last year already, sharpens them and gives them all the battle testing that they needed to survive pretty much anything. So the only thing is, I do think that, if they run into Kansas City or Buffalo in a road game this time around in an AFC championship, I think that they wouldn't get past that point because I think primarily my biggest concern there is the offensive line and the protection of Burrow. I think that's where probably the jig is up for them right about there because the Bills can rush the passer extremely well. And the Chiefs can do it. They have the scheme to do it when they need to, even though they're not known as this incredibly great pass rush defense. But they've got some really good defensive players that can get after the quarterback. And I think either one of those cases is where,
Here's the kicker with home field, because I was going to say the Bengals are at 10-4, Bills are at 11-3, the Chiefs are 11-3, so it's still a race for home field advantage. The roar of the crowd and all that makes a difference. But those are 3 cold weather teams, so it doesn't matter who has a home field advantage. Weather won't be as big a factor with those 3 teams. Buffalo, bad weather in playoff season. Cincinnati, you're old enough. You remember the San Diego Chargers versus Cincinnati Bengals. Cold weather. I was angry, not as an adult. I get angry at that because I'm like, the Chargers were the best team by far. The only reason the Bengals won because of the weather. I think the Chargers and 49ers in that Super Bowl would have been a blowout, high-scoring affair. And Dan Fouts would have gotten his due. It's not fair, but I tell people, you're right, it's not fair, and that angers me, but life's not fair, people, and you deal with it. But I love the analysis. I'm in total agreement. Who do you see though making it into the champion? If you had to, I don't want to say put a gun in your head. That's politically incorrect. But if somebody said you can't leave this room until you give me the two teams in the AFC and the winner, who would you say?
Yeah, that's I think that it probably I might give Buffalo the slight edge. If I would say, I guess whoever's playing at home, but even then, I think Buffalo still has that chip on his shoulder from last year, from what happened with the Chiefs. So in the divisional round, I guess it was, that was just another one of those incredible endings that we'll never forget. And I think that they have they have that one big, stud receiver in Stephon Diggs that the Chiefs don't have anymore. Although Mahomes works magic with whoever he's got around him usually, and Travis Kelce almost becomes like that number one, receiver. But I think that Buffalo would have potentially just a slight edge defensively also, and that would give them maybe just enough. I think it would be another instant classic type of game if it came down to those two at the end, though. Because
I agree.
We won't forget too, Kansas City now, they're about to get Mecole Hardman back this week. I think they'll get Clyde Edwards-Helaire back eventually, so then they'll have a three-headed backfield that they can kind of attack with. So it would really be about as close. I can imagine a line, for that game would be, if everybody was healthy, would be about less than the standard 3-point advantage for the home team, for sure. I think we would be looking at about a 1 to 1.5 point line, probably either direction, because it would be that close. Yeah.
I think what you're trying to say, Juan Carlos, is the statement has never been more truer than when you talk about right now the Bills, the Bengals, and the Chiefs. And that statement is on any given Sunday, because we can sit there and correctly pick winners and then just be off on another week. It depends. The injuries, the weather, how they're feeling that day. I mean, that's how close these teams are in terms of their competitiveness, the talent, and the will to win. I think right now, if you put a gun to my head, I say the team that wants it the most is probably the Bills. So because of that, I'd have to give them a slight edge. But we've seen to me, the Achilles heels for the Bills is their defense when they're facing the Chiefs. As far as the Bengals, I think it's their offensive line. People forget the final play of the Super Bowl. I forget what receiver was wide open. If Burrows had just an extra couple of seconds.
They invested heavily in the offensive line in the offseason. They brought in 3 new starters, actually. But although they've gotten better over the course of the season, when they're facing, I think, an elite pass rushing unit, or if it's the case of the Chiefs, a team with a veteran defensive coordinator that knows how to draw up schemes to get to the quarterback like Spagnuolo does, I think that either way, they are going to be facing too much a choppy offense. I think is what's gonna result. I think because Burrow won't have enough time. But so I think ultimately, I think that at some point it ends up being Buffalo and Kansas City. Really,
can't argue. I tell you this: that Josh Allen kid is. I love Mahomes. I haven't seen enough of Jalen Hurts to get a good or bad impression. Outside of the data looks like phenomenal. Yeah. But there's something about Josh Allen with all the he just seems like a big kid who doesn't have the ego, but just wants the team to win. He may be saying the right things or whatnot, but I just love that. And I'll be honest, I think Rachel Bush is the hottest wife in all of football. And she's married the quarterback, Poyer. She's a model. Okay. Look her up on Instagram, people. Okay. So I'm rooting for the Bill. No, I'm kidding. But my point being is that it's going to be a big game, big event. Big everything. Another great season we're having. The season started out a little slow with a lot of dud games early on, but this second half of the season has been just as exciting as the last 2 seasons. And football is king. And Juan Carlos, I know you're on social media a lot. I retweet your work. And so people who need to follow you on Twitter, what is your handle? And is there anywhere else they can find your work?
Yeah, thanks. My handle is JC Blanco 22, so pretty easy to remember. Through there, I basically tweet out, as you know, daily, just the different articles from the different websites that
And different
I'm
sports. You do
unfortunately,
different
and different.
sports.
Yeah, so definitely football and basketball are big focuses, but in addition to that, baseball, when that season comes around, I'm definitely doing pretty much daily content there of some kind for different sources. And coming up here too, I'll add to the football conversation. Last year was fortunate enough with Tim and the game day to do some USFL betting articles each week. So I'm assuming that we're going to be doing that again this year, and the XFL coming up here before the USFL this year. So we're going to have 2023 should be 12 full months of football without interruption almost. I mean, when you also throw in the CFL, which is another league that I've covered, I cover
Well, hold
from
on.
Wire, and so yeah.
The fantasy football league itself, the one where the fans call the plays. Any coverage with that?
Oh, fan controlled football. Yeah, no, I haven't done that. I've caught a couple of those games, and they've had some big names that have gone over there. I've seen T.O. play over there, I think, and then Manziel doing pretty good. But yeah, haven't covered them. But these other, with the way that the XFL and the USFL, I guess, line up for this coming year, I don't know that there's even going to be a week. There's going to be maybe a week in between the two seasons. It's going to be interesting to see if these two spring leagues can kind of survive. The USFL, I think, did a lot better than people realize, both from the ratings perspective and in feeding the NFL some players. A lot of guys who did go to camps. Some are on active rosters. Obviously, some didn't make it. But I think that the NFL is pretty happy with having that feeder system again.
Right.
And
right.
They did a pretty decent job. For anybody who didn't catch some of the action, I mean, you'll kind of enjoy it if you're not too burned out on football by the time summer comes. They're pretty good, and I think the XFL they have a nice group of coaches that a lot of people are going to recognize. Hines Ward, Anthony Beck, Wade Phillips, a lot of guys that have coached in the NFL or played in the NFL. So
well, you know what? Yeah. Bob Stoops. Yeah. I'm like, what happened to Bob Stoops? And he's like, which one, XFL or USFL? I'm like, XFL, I would have assumed he would have gotten a shot somewhere on the NFL staff or something. It just seems kind of odd. Well, to go from a national champion, big program in Oklahoma, XFL.
Yeah, he was there in the XFL in 2020. So this is his second go. So he's just basically coming back.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, some of these guys, I think they like, they've got all the money they need already. They've got all the fame they need. They love the part about going back and being able to build something from the ground up, which is always exciting, and coaching these and really teaching these guys, teaching a bunch of young guys who are fighting and hungry to get to the next level. So I think that's where a lot of the appeal comes in for some of these veteran coaches, that you kind of scratch your head initially and say, why are they doing this? But yeah, it probably comes specifically from that. So yeah, I'm expecting it's going to be a big 2023 for my content, hopefully, and just for sports in general. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and everybody, we've had a big treat here, Juan Carlos Blanco. I love the name. Lots of good information, fantasy, USFL, XFL. Juan Carlos, I do want you to come back and give us some great advice again, if it's possible. I know you are busy, and I've had a hell of a time here talking to you for the last hour and a half. It's great to talk football with people who are knowledgeable and people who are winners. So thank you for taking the time out. And everybody, real quick, your handle again on Twitter.
Yes, it's at JC Blanco 22.
And we will have that at the bottom of the feed there as well. Juan Carlos, I probably won't talk to you until next time. So Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. God bless, and thank you for coming on. And everybody,
so much again.
We shall talk soon again. We are out.